Well, hey, we're so glad you're with us here at Summit Park today. We're continuing our series, Faithful, and we've covered a lot of different characters: Noah, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joshua, Rahab, Moses. And today we're talking about Joseph. We're talking about Joseph. And if I were to give today's message a title, I would give it this. It's Ready, Set, Faith. Ready, Set, Faith. And when you think about the story of Joseph, you're probably familiar with it at some level. You might be thinking of when he was thrown into the pit, or when he was taken to Potiphar's house, or when he went to the prison, or maybe in the palace. But what's interesting is that the writer of Hebrews, where we're looking at, Hebrews 11, this whole series based on this one chapter in Hebrews 11, the writer of Hebrews, when he goes back and he looks and he highlights Joseph's life, something that he did awesome by faith, doesn't look at any one of those moments of where he had faith through the prison, or he had faith, out of the pit, or had faith in Potiphar's house, or had faith while he was helping Pharaoh, and all of that stuff. He doesn't highlight any of that. He actually goes to the end of his life. So Hebrews chapter 11, I'm going to read it to you. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 22. This is the only thing it says about Joseph, but it's really, really powerful. Listen to what it says. By faith, Joseph, when his end was near, spoke about the exodus of the Israelites from Egypt and gave instructions concerning the burial of his bones. Now, isn't that inspiring? Just like, oh yeah, by faith you take my bones, take my bones. That's by faith. So it can seem a little confusing. Like, what is that an act of faith? It doesn't seem like it. But if you go back to Genesis, go back to the original story, chapter 50, this is what Joseph on his deathbed says. Then Joseph said to his brothers, starting in verse 24, I'm about to die, but God will surely come to your aid and take you up out of this land, to the land he promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, his dad, his grandpa, and his great-grandpa. Verse 25, and Joseph made the Israelites swear an oath and said, God will surely come to your aid, and then you must carry my bones up from this place. Here's why that was such a amazing thing for the writer of Hebrews to highlight, was really that's the pinnacle of Joseph's faith. Because he knew that God had made a promise to his great-grandpa, like, hey, I'm going to take you out of where you are right now, and I'm going to give you a land. It's going to be the promised land. And maybe even Joseph, if you go through his story, he maybe even thought that promise was going to be fulfilled in his lifetime, but it wasn't. But Joseph still believed, even though he wasn't going to be able to see it, he believed this is going to come to pass. If God said it, he is going to do it. And Joseph believed it. His faith was at its pinnacle at that moment. And that's why the writer of Hebrews highlights that little moment at the end of his life. Now, leading up to that point, obviously Joseph had experienced some, what I like to call some growth spurts in his faith. We're going to look at three of them today of what led him at the end of his life to have such great faith that the writer of Hebrews highlights. What were kind of the things along the way that helped him grow in his faith? They're going to call them growth spurts. Maybe you've experienced a growth spurt. I'm still waiting for mine. I'm still waiting for my growth spurt, okay? But Joseph experienced three in relation to his faith. And I want to encourage you with this today, that if you're a follower of Jesus, God will use the good things in your life, the bad things in your life, the ugly things in your life to grow your faith. And as we look at this story in Joseph, we're going to see that there's some bad things that happen to Joseph, and God uses it to grow his faith. And you know what? They're actually pretty similar to probably things that either God has already done in your life to grow your faith, or he's going to do in your life, or maybe even that he's doing right now in your life. So I hope that you'll pay attention and look closely at some of these as we go through them. Okay, so there's three of them. There's 3 points. Here we go. Number one, faith grows when God illuminates the shadows cast by our gifts. Kind of wordy, but that's as short as I can make it to get that point. Faith grows when God illuminates the shadows cast by our gifts. Number two, faith grows when we can be trusted in the small things. And number three, faith grows when we are content with God's timing. All right, we're going to jump into this first point. If you're ready, say, oh yeah. Okay, point number one. Faith grows when God illuminates the shadows cast by our gifts. All right, turn to your neighbor right now and say, hey, you got a gift? Go and turn to him and say, you got a gift? Now turn to him and say, but it's got a shadow side. It's got a shadow side. You know, oftentimes we think that God just works on our weaknesses, but, you know, God works on our gifts, and he can work on the shadow side of our gifts. Here's the reality. A strength or talent, ability, a gift pushed too far without wisdom becomes a liability. Let me show you what I mean. Joseph was honest. Oh, he was an honest Abe. He was reliable. He was dependable. He was good with details. He was a guy that you would want around that if you needed somebody just to depend on, needed something to get done. Man, Joseph was your guy. He was an honest dude. But early on, that honesty hurt him a little bit. Let me show you what I mean. Genesis chapter 37, Joseph has a couple dreams. The dreams weren't bad. Those were from God. But it's what he did with those dreams that was like, probably not a good idea. All right, Genesis 37, starting in verse 5. This is what it says. Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. See, his brothers, his other 11 brothers, didn't like him because Joseph was the favorite from his dad. His dad gave him this beautiful coat of many colors, just gave him whatever he wanted. And his other brothers despised him because of it. And it says, he said to them, this is Joseph talking to his brothers, listen, this dream that I had, we were binding sheaves of grain out in the field, and when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it. His brothers said to him, do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us? And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said. Now you'd think at this moment, Joseph would be like, you know what, guys, I shouldn't have said that. I should have just kept that dream to myself. I should have not shared that with you. But instead, guess what? He has another dream, and this time he shares it with everyone. Then he had another dream, and he told it to his brothers. Listen, he said, I have another dream. And this time the sun and moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me. So now he includes mom and dad. When he told his father as well as his brothers, his father rebuked him and said, what is this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you? His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. Joseph was an honest dude. He was factual. He's like, well, wait, that's what happened. I'm just telling you the truth. You ever have someone like that in your life? Just real factual, just kind of blunt, just kind of says it like it is. Don't nudge anybody right now if you're seated next to them. I had this, to be honest, I can be a little honest sometimes, okay? A little too honest sometimes, and this actually happened recently. My wife got a new hairdo that she was trying out, and, hey, wait, listen, hold on. Let me tell my story. So my wife, she had this new hairdo, and I was thinking, I saw it, and I was like, you look good, girl. I didn't say that, though. I like that. So then she asked me, hey, what do you think of it? And that what came out was different than how I really felt. It was the reality. I literally said to her, I was like, well, can you undo it? I know, it was pretty bad. Still recovering from that one. But what I was thinking in my defense was like, well, if you don't like it and you can't undo it, you can't change it, right? That's factual. But was that dumb? Yes, okay, I needed wisdom, okay, a little too honest right there. Now, I really did genuinely like it, but that's where I was like, okay, I should have thought that through. And for Joseph, he should have thought through some of these things where he was just a little too honest. That was his strength. His honesty was a liability because it wasn't influenced by wisdom. He had the gifting, but he didn't have tact. He didn't have the emotional intelligence. Now, to be fair, he was only 17, so he was learning. But unfortunately, because of this, he gets thrown into a pit. He gets thrown into a pit by his brothers. So if you go to Genesis 37, verse 19, we're going to see, just to kind of set up the context, his 11 brothers had gone out and they were like herding some sheep far away from their house, and Joseph had stayed back. And so Jacob, his father, had asked him, hey, can you go find your brothers and bring them back? And so Joseph was like, sure. So he goes and he's searching for them, finally finds them. But as he's a little ways off, his brothers see Joseph approaching. And this is what it says in verse 19. Here comes that dreamer. Here comes that dreamer, they said to each other. So they come up with this plan to kill Joseph. Don't end up killing him, but here I'll read it to you. Verse 23. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the ornate robe he was wearing. And they took him and threw him into the cistern. The cistern was empty. There was no water in it. As they sat to eat their meal, they looked up and saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. Their camels were loaded with spices and balm and myrrh, and they were on their way to take them down to Egypt. Judah said to his brothers, what will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood. His brothers agreed. So when the Midianite merchants came by, his brothers pulled Joseph up out of the cistern and sold him for 20 shekels of silver to the Ishmaelites, who took him to Egypt. Now, I'm not saying what Joseph's brothers did was right in any stretch of imagination. What they were doing was absolutely wrong. They shouldn't have been jealous. It was all, silly. But sometimes God lets us experience the shadow side of our gifting so that we can learn. And I believe in this, God was allowing Joseph to experience the shadow side of his gifting, about just being, quote unquote, too honest, just too factual. You don't have to say everything, Joseph. You don't have to say everything. Untrained gifting is a liability. And God needed Joseph to be honest, but to also let wisdom direct his gifting of honesty. And isn't that true of all of us? All of us have a gift, but there's also a shadow side to our gifting. So I've got some gifts I'm going to list out here, and I'm going to pair it with the shadow side of that gift. And hopefully by the end of the list, I'll have offended everyone, okay? So let's go through this list. Is your gift competitiveness? Awesome. But don't turn every family game night into a battle for dominance. There may be some in here. Is your gift logic? Awesome. But be careful not to dismiss people's feelings as irrational just because they don't fit into your equation. Is your gift being analytical? Awesome. Watch out for being critical of your spouse. Is your gift, do you have the gift of empathy? Awesome. But don't let taking on everyone else's emotion lead to burnout. Is your gift efficiency? Watch out not to treat people like objects on your checklist or mere data points to be optimized. Is your gift excellence? Great, but be careful not to let perfectionism paralyze your progress or crush the spirits of those who are still learning. Is your gift being a visionary? Sweet, but don't let your mind get lost in the clouds about tomorrow, that you neglect the people right in front of you today. Is your gift caution and risk management? This is me. Okay, this one's for me. Awesome, but don't let your preparation for the worst case scenario kill all joy and spontaneity in the present. Is your gift wit and humor? Also me. Awesome, but be sure not to use your sarcasm as a shield to hide your true feelings or a sword to cut people down. Is your gift flexibility? Great, but don't become so fluid that you're flaky, unreliable, or stand for nothing. Is your gift charisma and persuasion? Awesome, but don't use your silver tongue to manipulate people into doing things that only benefit you. Is your gift being honest like Joseph? Awesome, but don't use your lack of emotional intelligence to just say the facts. Okay, did we offend everyone from that list? You probably could identify with some of those gifts, and that's wonderful. Those things are great, but here's the reality. God wants to use your gift, but he has to refine it so it doesn't become a liability. I think we all know of people, and certainly can look in the Bible of stories, of people that are gifted, but then they let the shadow side of their gift get the best of them, and it forfeits God's plan for their life. And God didn't want that for Joseph. He wanted him to learn. So he learns by experiencing the pit, the consequence of the shadow side of his gift. And this is where it becomes useful. This is where it becomes really, really powerful. Because years later, Joseph would stand before Pharaoh. And you can't just talk however you want in front of Pharaoh. You can't just be like, I'm just going to say the facts here. You have to have emotional intelligence to speak in front of Pharaoh. So if we were to fast forward in the story, we were to go to the point to where Joseph is called up out of prison, and he's been known as a person who can interpret dreams. Pharaoh has a dream. So Joseph comes and interprets that dream, basically says, hey, there's going to be 7 years of plenty, and then there's going to be 7 years of famine. At that moment, after Joseph interprets the dream for Pharaoh, you would think at that moment, it's like, hey, bro, like, what can you give me? Can you give me, some money? Can you get me out of prison? Hey, I'm your guy to help you out. Like, I interpreted your dream. Like, help me out here. He could have blurted out all those things. But instead, what he does, if we go to Genesis chapter 41, Joseph offers wisdom instead. He's now refined. Genesis 41, verse 33. And now let Pharaoh look for a discerning and wise man to put him in charge of the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh appoint commissioners over the land to take a fifth of the harvest of Egypt during the 7 years of abundance. They should collect all the food of these good years that are coming and store up the grain under the authority of Pharaoh to be kept in the city for food. This should be food held in reserve for the country to be used during the 7 years of famine that will come upon Egypt, so the country may not be ruined by a famine. See, Joseph had to learn, hey, I can't just say whatever I want. I'm going to talk differently. The old Joseph would have blurred out like, hey, yo, I'm your guy right here. But Pharaoh would have been off-putting for Pharaoh. I mean, he's a king. You don't just talk like however you want to the king. But God had refined Joseph's gift. He had removed the shadow side of it. Now God was able to use Joseph in a powerful way. And Pharaoh says, hey, you're the guy, Joseph. We need you to help us. And God used Joseph to save many lives. Here's the reality. We all have strengths. But because of those strengths, they by default have a shadow side to them. Because you're good at that, you're also bad at this thing. Because you're really analytical, you're also kind of drive people crazy a little bit. You're good at this, but there's also, and God wants to work on that because he doesn't want that to hinder his plan for your life. He wants to use you. He wants to use that gift, but he needs to take away the shadow side. So here is my challenge to you. Here's a dangerous prayer to pray this week. Lord, show me the areas of my personality that are a liability to what you have for me ahead. Refine my strengths so they don't become my stumbling blocks. It's a dangerous prayer. I warn you, it's a dangerous prayer, but it will be a fruitful one. God will use you in a greater way. All right, number two. Everybody say number two. All right, faith grows when we can be trusted in the small things. Faith grows when we can be trusted in the small things. This is all about integrity. This is all about who you are behind the scenes. Who is it that no one else sees, but only God can see? All right, so Joseph, after he was thrown in the pit, he was taken out, sold to the Ishmaelites in slavery. He was taken to Egypt. When he arrived in Egypt, he was then put as a slave in Potiphar's house, okay, his household. So he did a really good job, and so Potiphar recognized, his gifting, that he's reliable, he's dependable, so he put him in charge of a lot of stuff. I can depend on this dude. So then he put him in charge of a lot of things. There was just one problem. Potiphar's wife, had a little thing for Joseph because Joseph was good looking. He was hard worker. She was very attracted to him. So then she was trying to seduce Joseph. And so this was a point of obviously a problem, but obviously Joseph is not going to give in to that. Joseph's a man of integrity. He's going to do the right thing even when no one is looking. His parents weren't around. He's off to Egypt. He could get away with this, but he chooses to do the right thing. Look what he says. This is what he says to her. But he refused. So he refused to give in. With me in charge, he told her, seeing Joseph to Potiphar's wife, my master, talking about Potiphar, does not concern himself with anything in the house. Everything he owns, he has entrusted to my care. I mean, Joseph had just risen the ranks. He was so trustworthy. He says, my master has withheld nothing from me except you, talking to his wife. He said, because you are his wife. The one thing that Joseph obviously couldn't have. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God? So in that interaction, she kept pressing him. One event, it says that she just kept pressing him and grabbed his coat, and then he was like, no, and he runs away without his coat on. He was falsely accused by Potiphar's wife. He ends up losing his coat, losing his job. He went to prison, but he kept his integrity. He did the right thing. He did the right thing. This is a powerful point. I encourage you to think over this. Private integrity is the container for public power. Private integrity is the container for public power. For Joseph, he had to learn what it meant to do the right thing behind the scenes. And here's why this is important, specifically for this story, is because he had to learn to say no to Potiphar's wife so that he could say no to vengeance against his brothers. Because one day, Joseph would be in power. He would be second in command in all of Egypt. He'd have a lot of power. And you know what? He could think about his brothers. He could be like, I remember what happened there. I'm going to go get my brothers. And I'm going to kill them because of what they did to me. I'm going to finally pay them back. But instead, Joseph knew what it meant to be integrous. And ultimately, you only know if you're truly integrous when it's behind closed doors. No one else will know what you're doing. Only God will know. And Joseph passed the test. He did what was right, even when he could have done what was wrong. And later on, he was able to do the right thing toward his brothers. And because he had practiced doing what was right in the dark, he could do what was right now in the light. Look what it says in Genesis 50. This is, now we're going to fast forward almost to the end. This is now when Joseph, his dad had died. So Jacob died. Joseph's father had passed away. And now, obviously, Joseph's brothers are a little worried. Now the dad's gone. What's Joseph going to do? This is what it says. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, what if Joseph holds a grudge against us and pays us back for all the wrongs we did to him? So they sent word to Joseph saying, your father has left these instructions before he died. This is what you are to say to Joseph. I ask you to forgive your brothers the sins and wrongs they committed in treating you so badly. Now please forgive the sins of the servants of the God of your father. When their message came to him, Joseph wept. So basically, his brothers made up this story because they were afraid, saying that his father had said this. But Joseph knows, it's not true. He weeps. Then verse 18, his brothers then came and threw themselves down before him. Here's the fulfillment of the dream. We are your slaves, they said. But Joseph said to them, don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? So now Joseph doesn't take vengeance when he could have, because he's a man of integrity. He held his integrity. Don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. So then, don't be afraid. I'll provide for you and your children. And he assured them and spoke kindly to them. Because Joseph chose to do the right thing, God was able to use him in a powerful way. If he had killed his brothers, then the people of God would be erased. There wouldn't be any more people of God, which eventually would come the Messiah that we've now experienced today, his forgiveness, his goodness. So this was all a part of God's plan, but it started with integrity behind closed doors. And here's the reality. We live in a world that values charisma over character. And I want to encourage you, God is looking for vessels that won't crack under the pressure, that they decide to do what's right behind closed doors, when you can clear the browser history, when you can hide all the receipts that no one maybe is looking at. When you choose to do the right thing, that's the kind of people that God is looking for to use, because he knows that if he could trust you with a little, then he can trust you with a lot. This is what Jesus said. Luke 16:10 says, whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much. And whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much. Obedience in the dark prepares us for the light. And that's what it was for Joseph, and that's what it is for you and me. I want to encourage you today. Maybe you're a different person in a different, space. Maybe behind closed doors, so to speak. I want to encourage you. God wants you to be integrous, whole, and he can help you. He can make you whole. And he won't use you until you choose to say, I'm going to take that step of integrity, and will grow your faith. All right, number 3, faith grows when we are content with God's timing. Faith grows when we are content with God's timing. So this is when Joseph, I know we're going all over the Joseph story here, but when he was in prison, so he gets falsely accused by Potiphar's wife, he ends up in prison. There is the Pharaoh's baker and Pharaoh's cupbearer both get thrown into prison because they did something bad. So they get thrown into prison. Both of them have a dream. Well, Joseph has the gift of interpreting dreams. And Joseph was able to interpret their dreams while they were in prison. Now the baker, things didn't go well for him. But the cupbearer, he was able to be restored to his position. And so right before the cupbearer leaves prison, Joseph says something to him. You can probably imagine what he says. He says this, but when all goes well with you, talking to the cupbearer, remember me. Joseph say, remember me while I'm in prison here and show me kindness. Mention me to Pharaoh and get me out of this prison. Unfortunately, something that happens, the cupbearer, he doesn't remember. This is what it says, next verse. The cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. Then, when 2 full years had passed. So he says this thing, hey, didn't I do that great thing for you? I interpreted the dream for you and things have gone well. Make sure you remember me. But the cupbearer forgot about Joseph. You know, it was like those 2 years. It's ready, set, wait. Or from God's perspective, ready, set, faith. Joseph had to trust. He had to trust God's timing. Can you imagine that? For 2 full years, 730 days of him just waiting. He'd wake up, day 333, like, maybe today is the day that I was remembered. And he would go to sleep disappointed, but not today. He had to learn to trust God, someone who was given a dream by God. Can you imagine? He's like, yeah, all this thing, you're going to be a ruler, basically. He's going to put you in influence, but you're sitting in prison. That's pretty lame. But he had to learn to trust God's timing. Joseph had to learn that God's delays are not God's denials. He had to learn to be content, not just with God's plan, but with God's clock. And you know, that's the same is true for us. Maybe right now you're in one of those 2 full year moments. You're in a season where things are challenging and difficult, and you're wondering, God, where are you? I feel like you've given me a dream. I feel like you've given me promises, but I'm sitting, quote unquote, in a prison right now. I'm faced with a challenge that is difficult. Joseph had to learn that. And because of it, his faith grew. And that's why he was able to say, hey, you know, I believe this Abraham promise for my great-grandpa is going to happen. And maybe it's going to happen in this lifetime. Joseph was thinking, maybe we're all going to go move into that land. We're going to take over. We're going to be our own nation. We're going to say, thank you, Pharaoh, but see you later. But that never happened. And that on his deathbed, he said, he could have just been like, I guess it's not going to happen. But instead, his faith grew because he trusted God's timing. He said, even though it's not going to happen in my lifetime, you know what? It's still going to happen. I know that if God said it, God is going to do it. So when that comes to pass, hey, take my bones. I want to be there with you, sort of. I want to be in that promised land with you because I believe it's going to happen. Maybe for you, you're waiting for your marriage to be restored. Maybe for you, you're waiting right now for a healing. Maybe for you, you're waiting for a son or daughter to come to faith. Maybe for you, you're waiting for that opportunity in your career. Maybe for you, you're waiting for your business to turn around. I want to encourage you to trust God's timing. Trust him. He's got a plan. He's got it figured out. You don't have to take the wheel. You can let God and you can let go. Your job, my job, is to simply trust. I want to encourage you, would you stand to your feet? I want to take a moment. I want us to take a moment to just pray here at the end. And really those 3 areas. Maybe today you were, as we talked about some of those gifts, you recognize the shadow side of your gift. And it's hurting you. And God's trying to point that out and show you that to you. I want to encourage you to give that to God. He'll help you work through those things. Or maybe for you, it's an integrity thing. Who you are in public is different than who you are behind the scenes. And God wants to work on that. But because you've got some cracks in your vessel, He can't take you to the next level. He wants to grow your faith. He wants to take you to the next level, but there's got to be integrity. Or maybe for you on this last one, just learning what it means to trust him in his timing, learning what it means to say, God, I'm going to let go. I believe you have a plan. It's not about my plan. I'm going to trust you with this time. Maybe you've been praying for healing for way more than 2 years. Maybe you've been praying for restoration for way more than 2 years. Maybe you're on year 10, year 20. I want to encourage you to keep trusting God. Let Joseph's story tell you and show you to be a reminder that you can trust God's